Mum and Dad on their wedding day.
During a recent search for photographs of his father,
He was a real character. He was full of life.
Norm Gamble came across a handwritten note he'd never seen before.
And there's my father's name just there. He was known as Sunshine.
The note from 1938 was written by Norman Sunshine Gamble when he was a 26-year-old dock worker on the wharfs in Port Kembla.
There was no job security. You just turned up and they'd pick out who they wanted for a day's labour, and you'd worked in pretty harsh conditions.
Sunshine Gamble wrote about an 11-week standoff he took part in when about 180 dock workers refused to load iron onto a ship, the Dalfram, bound for Japan. The workers feared the iron would become weapons used against the Chinese and would eventually come back to Australia.
He spoke of the hardships there and how they supported one another, and how a lot of the families from other different unions, he was always a union man, how a lot of the different workers from the mining industry and all these other different industries would support them through this period.
The workers went without wages to feed their families for nearly 3 months.
So no work, no pay, no food. So if it hadn't have been for the goodness of some businesses in Port Kembla and from the Chinese market gardeners in Sydney bringing food down to workers here, people would have done it extremely tough.
The men who refused to load the ship also endured physical violence.
But as my father said, being bashed and made, trying to get these men to work, and they were death threats, but they took a stand.
The Dalfram dispute was more than an industrial standoff. It was a moral protest fueled in part by a concern for the welfare of people the workers had never met.
They believed in what they were doing. They believed it was the right thing. They would have seen their children go without meals. They would have seen their children get a little skinnier. I think we can put that on social media.
Sandra Pires produced and directed a documentary of the ordeal called The Dalfram Dispute 1938 Pig Iron Bob. The film relies on interviews and factual recreations to tell the workers' story.
This story is a story that most Australians should know and should be proud of. It was a story that was very selfless. It was a story that was essentially about what was happening on the other side of the world, but that the men felt strongly about.
Tian Li Zhu is a Chinese-born artist living in Sydney. In 2018, she was approached about creating a monument to honor the Dalfram dispute.
To see the sacrifices, especially the men, women, children, and it's the whole community stood together to doing something maybe not even many of them know who the Chinese are, but the sense of the humanity and for peace. I was very touched, I was very moved.
The sculptures it created now sits on a bluff overlooking the ocean in Port Kembla. It includes a ladder symbolizing a bridge between two cultures and strategically placed holes that represent the Chinese friendship knot.
It is about the ordinary people, men, women, just like you and me, how we build this friendship, how we getting together in a danger time.
Before this monument was unveiled in 2018, the only visual reminder of what happened here more than 8 decades ago was a small, unassuming sign sitting in the middle of a nearby car park. The story of the Dalfram dispute may not still be widely known, but it is certainly not forgotten, especially by the people it touched.
When Sandra Pires did her film, Pig Iron Bob, she interviewed some survivors of the Nanking massacre. And she has reported that one of the few words of English that these people knew was the word Dalfram.
I feel proud, that they took that stand. Him and the other guys that he worked with. When you consider they could have taken the easy way out and backed down and loaded the ships and have work and getting paid for that, but they didn't. They stood their ground.
Because, Norm Gamble says, his father and the rest of the men working on the docks here in 1938 believed that doing the right thing, regardless of the personal cost, was much more important than doing nothing at all. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Port Kembla.